Folks, welcome. Welcome to the Vermont Center for Family Studies Free Together program. It's an educational service of the Vermont Center for Family Studies, where our mission is to strengthen families. And I'm very happy to have as my guest today, my colleague, Bob Noone. Dr. Noone is faculty at the Center for Family Consultation in Evanston, Illinois, which was one of the early offshoots of Bowen's Bowen Center in DC, which he founded with Sidney Reed, Carol Moran, and Stephanie Ferrara. And he's on the faculty of the Bowen Center now. And he's the editor of the journal Family Systems, succeeded, I think, Bob, I think you're the second editor. Am I right?
Right.
Succeeded Dr. Kerr as the editor, which is a very important role that Bob plays in the Bowen world and in the world of ideas. And he's a co-editor of a number of books. Bob, you've been busy. The Family Emotional System in 2015, Handbook of Bowen Family Systems Theory and Research Methods 2020. And then this year, I'm going to put the picture of that up here. Family and Self, Bowen Theory and Shaping of Adaptive Capacity, which we'll talk some about in this meeting. He received his doctorate from University of Illinois at Chicago and postgraduate training at Georgetown University Medical Center and the Bowen Center. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Eric. It's good to be here.
I noticed in your book, you thanked a number of people, including some of the people I just mentioned, and you sort of dedicated it to your County Mayo families. You want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I put that in, I was thinking it'll be a question that will come up for a lot of people. And County Mayo is a county in Ireland, in the northwest corner of Ireland. And it really refers to my multi-generational family. So all 16 of my great-great-grandparents were born and raised in that county.
Wow. And
probably all 32 of my great-great-grandparents were, but I don't have the records that go back that far. So it's I'm a product of that county. My parents are born and raised there, so they came to this country when they were in their teens.
So you're kind of closer in your, just at your birth, you're probably a little bit closer to the old country than many people of your time, and certainly of my time and my kids' time. Yeah. And when is the first time you went back to County Mayo?
Well, when I was 8 years old, my mother took myself and my two brothers. We spent the summer there. That was the first time she had gone back since she left. So we spent half the summer on my mother's side of the family's farm and the other half on my father's side. They were only about 6 miles apart, but they didn't know each other in Ireland, of course.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they didn't meet until they came to this country.
Your parents didn't know each other when they were in Ireland.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
and
then I went back.
Apart.
I went back second time in 1971. So that was as an adult. I went back, and I didn't know Bowen theory yet, but I did want to meet my family. There was quite a few aunts and uncles that I hadn't met before, and cousins. So I spent about 5 weeks in the British Isles and Scotland and England and Ireland, where I have family.
I think that's an instinct that lives in many people to understand where they came from. And, the success of Ancestry.com and things like that is a testament to that, but it probably runs stronger in certain people.
Yeah, and I don't know how strong it ran in me before. I mean, I was always aware of it. I didn't know the families there. I would see letters that would come. They didn't have phones, and so phone contact wasn't a part of their communication. And so I got interested mostly when I started seeing families as a young professional. And I think I probably mentioned in the book, Carl Whitaker was a big influence. He was a consultant to the hospital I was working at on a monthly basis. And
yeah,
he
I saw
certainly
that. That was very interesting to know that you had connection with Whitaker before you found your way in a purposeful way, as you describe in the book, towards Marie Bowen and that body of ideas.
Yeah, so he was a big influence in terms of my interest in what is it about this larger family that I don't know much about, and knowing or coming to believe that I was connected to them, but I couldn't see it or really know them. So that first trip I made, I went unarmed with that Bowen theory.
Uh-huh.
And I had kind of a love-in with all the various families. I thought, wow, I don't see any problems here. These are great people. These are fun. They were warm and accepting. And so it was really a wonderful summer to get to meet some of these people. The second time I went back was in 1975. I had already started the postgraduate program at the Bowen Center. And so I was carefully trying to get some history from the family members that I would see in the same family members. But all of a sudden, a lot of things began to fall in place in terms of some history. I hadn't seen any cutoff before, but it was pretty obvious it was right there. I just hadn't seen it. And triangles, which I hadn't seen before. And just the better understanding of each nuclear family that I came in contact with. So it was the beginning part of a journey, and really, really rewarding in terms of using Bowen theory as a way of gaining some knowledge of my families and of myself.
Almost 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Can you say a little more about that, of how it impacted you? How did it impact your life doing that?
I don't know. I'd like to say overall I grew up a little bit, but it certainly gave me a sense of being a part of something larger than the family that I grew up in. I mean, I had a couple of aunts and uncles living in the Chicago area that I knew, but I didn't really know these other people. And I thought that the relative lack of communication, again, there weren't phones in those countries at the time, at least in Ireland. But I thought that the reasons why there was less contact really had to do with socioeconomic factors, that they really didn't have the capacity to travel back and forth in terms of financially. But it became pretty clear that there was the distancing wasn't just socioeconomic, it was emotional as well. And then knowing that it just made sense to me in terms of how I function, in terms of my own being a relatively distant character, that I came by it naturally.
Interesting. So it put that aspect of yourself in some broader context.
Yeah, and just the richness of, as probably most people listening in on this interview, and as you well know, the richness it adds to one's life to get to know the people that you are directly or indirectly connected to.
Yeah. You shared something with me in a conversation earlier this year about a moment you had there in Ireland that maybe touches on that point of richness. You remember what you told me about? I think you were up on a mountain, a small little hill there or something. Yeah,
it was. It captured the depth of the emotional system, I think, for me. I mean, I think I was aware of it anyways at that point. This was years later. I think probably maybe 1985, 1990. I was there by myself, and I was driving from Dublin to the West Coast. And I came to this one, it wasn't quite a mountain, but you could see, I got out of the car because you could see the expanse of the West Coast from that process. Probably it was the middle of Ireland. And I got out of the car and I just began to weep uncontrollably. I had no idea. I was first looking at the view and enjoying the view, and then I think the smells, something about it just hit me really dramatically. And then again, I think just sort of touched on how profound the emotional system is, at least for me, and for most people, I'm sure. It was, and part of the reconnecting I think
Yeah.
it was um, an, an experience of multiple generations separating out through immigration.
Uh-huh. You think that was part of the emotion that you had there related
I think
to
so.
that?
I think
Yeah.
so.
It's a beautiful story, I think, and one I think many people have had that, people who go back to the old country. I had something like this happen to me in Germany in a little tiny town. I was sitting up on a hill, a cliff overlooking this little town where both my mom's grandparents were born. And I had this strange feeling of feeling really at home there. And it was like, well, why am I feeling this way? So yeah, it's like interesting to hear that, even that the smell was somehow in you, maybe somehow that awareness of that smell.
Yeah, and it's hard to know how much of it was just related to previous trips that I had had there.
Sure.
And when I
Yeah,
was there,
or your ideas about it.
yeah, I don't think it was so much ideas. I think it was really much more basic than ideas.
That's an interesting comment. So yeah, the idea that the multi-generational family is living in us is perhaps one thing that's represented by that story.
That's where I came out with it. And again, I think maybe it was also perhaps related to being a child there and seeing when we were leaving, the emotional charge that it had between my mother and her mother.
You mean when you were really young there, when you were like
when I was 8 years old.
That that seems like a fortunate thing for a young person to go and spend a summer on a farm with grandparents that you hadn't met.
Yeah, and aunts and uncles. It was extraordinary. I was a city kid who grew up really sort of in an inner city neighborhood. It was all concrete. And then to be in this beautiful farmland with mountains and rivers and not far from the ocean, it was pretty extraordinary. And the animals.
What do you remember about that? I wonder how that impacted you that summer.
I don't know. It certainly impacted me more than I would probably be aware of. But certainly the surroundings, the connection with the larger family, the putting my mother and father in the context of their families.
Yeah.
That made a difference.
The phrase understanding yourself to be a part of a larger whole comes to mind. Yesterday, a client of mine, Bob, was talking about grief. It's a person who lost their daughter. And he said what he's learning is that he's like, grief is like this ball. And he said it doesn't get smaller in a situation like that. But that what he's learning is that the container around it, if he can expand the container around that ball, he said the container of myself, to expand the container of myself, that changes his experience of the grief.
It's a nice image.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty wise. Well, like I told you, I'm enjoying your book. It's just out and you can buy it in a couple of different ways. One is through Adobe digital editions. That's the online version. That's what I have. One of the things I noticed, Bob, is how, which is not surprising to me because I've watched you give speeches, talks, professional talks for years and years, how you packed so much research in there. I mean, if you're interested in research that's relevant to Bowen theory of the family as a system, emotional process, the book is a rich resource.
Oh, thanks. That was one of my objectives in the book, was to try and capture some of that, at least my own exploration among the sciences. Again, I think certainly, I'm sure you're aware of the extent to which Bowen theory either gets distorted or is often seen by many people as an original theory that's been outdated. And it's a theory that I would see as being continually developed. And there's a slow organic process, as I've thought about it, of individuals who are seeking knowledge and exploring the sciences, and that have contributed to what I think of as a research body, kind of an organic research body that isn't formally developed, but comes out of individual interests, and then this kind of relatedness that's happened over decades now, that for those of us who have been involved with this theory to a significant degree, I think we're all aware of the degree to which it's been developed and knowledge is developing, but I think many people outside that network are unaware of that. So that was part of what I was hoping to accomplish with this book. Not that those people would be reading it. At least it was my effort.
You never know. I think some of them will. So I guess you're calling that body of research, just to give an example, Bob wrote in the book about this serotonin transporter gene that can result in a child's heightened neuroendocrine stress reactivity to an adverse condition. And that originally this was thought to be a vulnerability gene accounting for a range of emotional disorders. And then here's the kicker. It was later found that the biological sensitivity depended on context. So, just one example, a book has got like thousands and thousands of sentences like that, which pull together this thing maybe that you're calling a kind of a body that is part of Bowen theory, even though Bowen might not be mentioned in those papers. Am I following you?
Yeah, I mean, that's one example of some of the knowledge that has developed in the sciences, which sheds light on Bowen theory. As you know, it's just a broad scope theory, and it is being filled in. Whether it's being filled in consciously by many of these scientists who don't know anything about Bowen theory, they're certainly not doing an effort to support Bowen theory, but their work is supporting Bowen theory. And that's one more example, I think, of what the sciences can contribute to getting a little more objective about human behavior.
You wrote that the integration of scientific knowledge, I believe, enhances the effectiveness of one's clinical practice. The surface of our knowledge of the family and its influence on behavior has barely been scratched. It remains a wide open field for those who decide to pursue it.
Yeah, I'm sure anyone who's worked at this over the years and as a clinical practice, you find yourself automatically describing in a way that it can be understood how some of that information is relevant. Real simple one was, there was a recent article I read about what's called adult neurogenesis, new brain cells being born in a part of the brain and then migrating to the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. And yet that is an important part of maintaining the well-functioning of the brain. And yet that process, the birth of brain cells, can be disrupted by stress and other factors. So again, these are little pieces that are just so interesting to me that help make sense. And that's a kind of thing that I could talk about in clinical sessions with people, which I found to be, people are really interested in hearing that. So it's a way of being non-judgmental about behavior and how basic this is, and trying to modify one's own behavior and all the various ways in which one can go about doing that.
Yeah, I've heard you talk before about how you use research clinically. And so it's good to hear you say more about it. And I was wondering, I'm interested in writing, and I wonder, it must have taken a lot of time to write these books. I mean, that's a lot of work. So you must have a passion for it. I was wondering, what's the impact of the writing of a book like that on you, on your clinical practice, would you say?
Yeah, I don't have a passion for it.
Well, you're very disciplined then, or you enjoy pain. I'm not sure
Yeah,
which.
I think I think yeah, the writing is very difficult for me. I just plod along. It's very slow. And what I found, I'm sure you found this as well, that both in terms of developing a presentation to present to a group, or in the writing, it adds to the thinking ability, some clarity of thought. I think writing and presenting are different. So there's something about the writing and trying to put some of the complexity down in a coherent way that is useful. That's the part of the challenge that I do like. And it's just a part of self-growth, I think, in terms of my own thinking. Knowing that when I look back on it, each effort, even though it's a struggle, has been worth it.
And can you say why? You know, you just said clarity of thinking, some kind of integration of what you know. Why worth it for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There's probably a lot that goes into that. I think some of it has to do with having an idea to put down, or what I'd like to capture on paper. And then as you know, with this damn systems orientation, all these other things pop up and you're trying to do it in a way that is relevant to the complexity of what's being described. And so that in itself is a kind of a workout to present some of the complexity clearly in a way that makes sense. And that's a part of, I think, the integration of knowledge, is thinking it through. When I write it out, do I really think that? Are those my thoughts? Or is that something I'm picking up from someone else? And then trying to make that distinction. So it's a workout, and it does take me a lot of time, I think, to write something coherently.
How do you think this impacts you as a helper, as a person who sits with family members, which I know you've been doing for a long time? It's one of the things I enjoyed in the early part of your book, kind of your telling about your journey and how it started long ago, with starting to watch families and just how your thinking evolved about that. Yeah, how does all that impact your presence with people?
Well, I think basically a curiosity. I think it helps to maintain a certain level of curiosity with the people that I'm meeting with. Trying to learn.
It kind of like expands your curiosity?
Well, it brings a certain level of curiosity to my meeting with people in terms of wanting to learn more about them. It's a way of applying the theory. Does this theory, what is it that this theory can contribute to my understanding what's going on in the present time? What fits or doesn't fit? So the writing, I think, just helps me get a little bit clearer, I think, in my own thinking. And then I think that's just useful in a session with people.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I think the effect of knowledge on a person, it could be to limit their curiosity versus expand it. But I think for you, it expands it. Your curiosity seems to be somewhat inexhaustible. I wonder, so you've been over 50 years probably as a family therapist or coach. Are you getting better at it? What are you learning in the last years of it? You've been at it a long time.
I don't know if I'm getting better. It's such a slow process, I think, but it's, I certainly enjoy it. I'm certainly at a time where I don't have to have too many sessions. So I get to savor them more in a sense. And it's so rich to learn about people. I mean, it's what a privilege to be able to sit down and try and learn about what someone is up against, what they're trying to accomplish, how they think about what they're experiencing, and always, of course, touches on something about myself in terms of what they're grappling with. So it's a pretty rewarding experience. I think that's one of the things that a theory like Bowen theory and systems thinking does, is it can allow the individual to be more separate and detached in a positive way with the people one is meeting with, without getting too caught up in their turmoil, if they're having turmoil, and being able to contribute to their own thoughtfulness. I mean, that, as you know, is probably a big factor, is trying to create a climate for thoughtfulness and inquisitiveness about people's own lives.
Yeah, putting them in a position to allow their inquisitiveness about their own lives to evolve is, I do think, a fine art. You know, it's like, sometimes, I think, well, why get this sort of classical training in therapy, or why keep studying Bowen theory if you're a helper? And it takes a lot of years to unlearn the impulse to jump in and get too involved and think you should have the solutions, especially when things are emotionally hot. I think, I wonder, so would you say you've gotten better at that over the years, do you think?
Probably depends what's going on in my life at various times too. You know, I can be better at some times and worse at other times. I think, yeah, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that so much. It'd be, I know I can have, I think that was happening pretty early on. I could have some fun with families or with individuals and talking about their families. I think that's something that goes way back. Whitaker was a master at it, I think. Bowen was a master at it. And watching the impact of someone who can engage a family around troubling issues and then turn it into having some fun, to be able to not take some things too seriously that aren't as serious as people are taking them to be.
Yeah. What do you remember about Whitaker? You know, I've heard so many Bowen stories. I read some of Whitaker's books, and what was he like, or what struck you about him? This having fun thing does seems to be part of his legacy.
Yeah, he was just a real character. He really liked trying to, I think, in some ways, blow things up and then see how people could put them back together.
Wow.
He was, he didn't have a theory, and he really managed the fusion or intensity by always doing co-therapy. So he would get very engaged with the family and then pull the co-therapist in, and he'd get on the outside. He just had this way of making comments that would disorient people, and trying to get out of the automatic. And I think he was a master at that. In some ways, I don't think he was very helpful with some people, though. I think he was helpful in terms of the awareness of the interconnectedness and the larger extended family. So he was, at that point in time, it was not long after that Bowen's Anonymous presentation in Philadelphia. And I think Whitaker was still very much impressed with Bowen's effort with extended family. So he I think helped families appreciate the larger extended family. He would sometimes refuse to meet with the family unless they could get the whole family there. So he liked having whole families. But he would, in terms of fun, I remember one time he said he was meeting regularly with this young man who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And he said he was just getting stuck. The sessions were becoming automatic. So one day he just, he took all the furniture out of his office. And he sat down in the middle of the room. So when the young man came in, there was Dr. Whitaker just sitting in the middle of an empty office. So he could go to extremes to sort of shake things up. Another memory was I was doing the co-therapy with him with this one family. It was this family. The mother had been hospitalized. She had chased her husband around the kitchen with a knife, and in the meeting was sort of going back and forth. And then Whitaker was talking with the husband, and he started talking about, how friendly he had been, and blah, blah, blah. And then Whitaker began to insinuate that this husband had homosexual tendencies.
Okay.
And this guy just exploded. He kicked over a garbage can and fled the room. And so I asked him, I said, what were you thinking? He said, that family will never be able to think the mother's the only crazy one in the family from now on.
Wow.
But I don't know if that was helpful for the family.
Very hard to know.
Yeah.
I mean, you're reminding me of something I was reading in Bowen, something he wrote, and he described that he's sitting with a client in his private practice, and the meeting ends, and the client says, well, my mother's here because she's coming to pick me up. And he, okay, I'm grabbing this chance. He goes out the door, walks across the lawn, and goes up to the car and starts interacting with mother through the car window, which, is against a lot of rules that you probably people are still trained that they should never, ever do something like that. And I've noticed this in many different areas, not just family therapy masters, but in many areas. If you talk to the leading thinkers, they do and say things very differently than a lot of the other people in the field do. And, like you're saying, Whitaker here, like that creativity and confidence to experiment does involve sometimes having a willingness to kind of break rules, I think. And just that interesting detail of, you got to bring your whole family here. What a challenge for them. And probably a lot of therapy going on to just simply go through the process of arranging that meeting. And an I position by Whitaker to signal to the group something that he believes.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting story about the furniture. I think for me, I noticed at one point that I was stuck in rules too much. And I kind of noticed, like, even the way I would talk to clients, I was kind of using this voice that I thought I should be using. And I had to kind of revive my willingness to be more experimental.
To be less of the expert, or
that probably was like a false expert self that I had to shed, and over time be more confident. You could experiment more and maybe just be yourself more. Yeah. But I think you can have the experimentation trained out of you.
Yeah, I think so.
It's a risk in getting training.
Yeah, well, I think one I mentioned in the book, one of my great fortunes was that first position I had in the hospital, which with there's 20 chronic schizophrenics, and then was a program just to be on the unit with the 20 individuals all day long, having meals with them, sitting down, talking with them, and trying to get comfortable with psychotic behavior. That in itself, dealing with schizophrenia, the rules go out the window. I mean, they have I think a real unique sensitivity to rule-based behavior, and avoiding that or whatever they do with it. But there weren't any rules.
Well, you're probably fortunate that to be on a unit where you could even have that thought. Early on, when I was in community mental health, I had two different bosses, and one of them, every time I go meet with him for supervision, he just wanted to tell me a lot of things and just talk and talk. I was, wow, I don't think I said anything. And it got pretty boring after a while. And then he got promoted, and he promoted this great guy. This other guy comes in and he'd say to me, so Eric, what are you going to try this week? And you just sit there and stare at me. And it was a lot more interesting. And he was sending me the signal, you need to be experimenting every week, because we don't know what we're doing here. And it was just a world of difference. And
Yeah, how
it's so
fortunate.
easy to make that mistake, I think, with training.
Yeah, that you're somehow supposed to know what you're doing all the time, or that you know what the answers are for people.
Yeah, I think you have a, I could thank you, because just the way you've interacted with me over the years, and I know I'm speaking for many people, it's a very quiet presence, but it's, I don't know, just the respect with which you meet people and the interest you have in other people's ideas has been very striking to me. And I've heard many people say it too.
Thank you. That's a nice compliment.
It's interesting how the different Bowen theory leaders or masters all are different. They have different styles, different qualities.
Well, certainly one aspect that has to do, I think, again, part of Bowen's genius was the recognition that, basically it's how you think about problems that is what's important. And theory can be a useful framework to allow the exploration of one's thinking, and that there isn't any standard way to do the therapy. It's a question of how do you think about what's going on, and management of oneself. And the effort, of course, is, to work on self always, always, always.
This is the traditional emphasis on avoiding techniques.
Yeah.
That's still a puzzle to me. And you just said something interesting about it, that work on self is more important than some technique that you use when you're trying to live Bowen theory in a helping situation.
Yeah, it's always a hard lesson, just recognizing you have to deal with yourself, and we're not as grown up as we like to think we are, or pretend we are. I'm certainly not.
Oh, I think in our training program, we have to work to not start to make it sound like it's just a bag of techniques. It sneaks in there.
Yeah, again, I think it gets back to the difficulty of trying to manage distress in another, and the distress it causes in oneself, and then trying to fix it, to try and get the distress level down by changing the other or doing something to the other.
Yeah,
it's one of the big challenges, isn't it, as a coach or a psychotherapist, is how do you manage to stay in the field when there's distress without getting too distressed?
Not to jump out and not to jump in.
Yeah.
And if you can get interested in that and start to do it, it almost has like there's a kind of a magical opening to possibilities. And it's, in a way, it's simpler, because all of a sudden now their ideas are more interesting.
Yeah, I think it opens the door for more learning.
About it. It's like almost like an in the moment mindfulness about that.
That makes sense to me.
I want to take a moment here to share some information. We've got a few comments come in, but I want to give folks a chance to share a reflection or ask a question to Bob in just a second. But before I do that, just to show you, I'm excited about this. Bowen at the movies. Michael Gilman said that, he's done case presentations for many years. Michael Gilman runs our training program, trained at the Bowen Center, but that he's found that movies can often convey so much more than a family diagram and stories about what people say. And this movie, Rachel Getting Married, if you haven't seen it, when I watched it, I thought, wow, the people involved in this really have an eye for family process. And it's available to rent and stream on Amazon Prime easily. And Michael's going to spend 3 hours showing clips of it and talking about how it illustrates aspects of Bowen theory and discussing that with the group. I just want to tell you a little bit about this movie to encourage you to think about coming to this. It's a contemporary drama with an aggressive sense of humor about the return of an estranged daughter to the family home for her sister's wedding. And it's Anne Hathaway got nominated for Oscar Best Actress for this role of Kim, whose reemergence throws a wrench into the family dynamics, forcing long simmering tensions to the surface in ways that are both hilarious and heartbreaking. It paints a colorful, nuanced family portrait. One of the things I love about it is you sort of see what's happening from the perspective of various people, the kind of kindly but very problem-focused father, anxiously problem-focused father, the looks all put together mother who, maybe like Whitaker was trying to sort of shake up those sort of boxes. So I want to encourage you to consider watching it and joining us for that. And then I'm really happy, Bob, I was thinking after, a year-long association with Mark Flan, and I'd gotten so much out of, you bringing him to meetings that I got to watch. I reach out to him, so I'm going to talk to him in February, and I hope you can come to that one, Bob. I'd love to get you in on that and let you talk to Mark some too during it.
Yeah, I wouldn't miss that one.
Okay, good. Yeah. And then I don't know if I'm 100% happy with this title, but sustainable and sparky. I like sustainable. I mean, how do you have both? And I just think marriage is absolutely fascinating, and we're going to have an interactive conversation about that in March. And you can ask me questions. We're going to do a little bit different format, almost a little bit like a call-in show.
I guess it depends what kind of sparks they are, right?
Burn the house down. And then I also just want to ask you to consider folks supporting us. We're offering this as a free service, but we don't survive without the help of generous donors like many of you have been. Asked you to consider a year-end donation to us. This picture, it's a little exciting, but what we're trying to show here is and this is true of centers like yours, Bob, in Chicago, the thousands, literally thousands of families who get touched by these centers, because we're training people who can do the kinds of things Bob and I are talking about doing, as all of you know. I mean, most of you know this, right? That people like our faculty member, Joy O'Neill, pictured up there on the left. Joy O'Neill touches thousands of families, over the course of the year, and Bowen theory has that power to impact the whole system. So this is like all the families saying thank you to you who've donated to us. Thank you back to you for the impact on you. I think your donation spreads calm, neutrality, and family wisdom through the world. So please, after this session, go to our website today and click on the donate button. It's easy and we will appreciate it. Also, another way you could support us is to register to get the recording of our symposium, which I was very pleased with this year. These are senior trainees, young people, many of them, and I think you will find the quality very high. It's inspiring to know that people younger than I can teach Bowen theory very effectively, better than I do. And that is evident here. We had some very interesting, unique presentations. And just one more thing is that we do have this training program that people can sign up for, and we have scholarships available for employees of nonprofit organizations. Thank you to Pomerleau Real Estate for making those possible. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And Lori Lassiter, you have your hand up. If you could unmute.
Yes, I had a question for Bob. But first, I just want to say how much I appreciate your book. And I've just begun to dip into it. But one of the things that struck me right away was your positive, constructive, even embracing attitude toward families. And, you know, it really took me aback. If I were ever going to write a book, it would be so much more about the negative. You know, it would be about what what people are doing to each other and they're not aware of it, God damn it.
I want to read that book.
I really think that, you know, I'm pretty excited about this, about noticing the difference. And I'm assuming it in part has to do with what position you grow up in your family and the level of differentiation in your family. And I think that seeing the world, which has come up in other sciences, seeing the world as welcoming and relationships as, there's so many better words than positive, but the positive nature of relationships, the fun, the challenge in a fun way, I think is an indication of differentiation. But anyway, I was just interested in your thinking, the thinking that went into making this such a positive presentation about what families can offer one another.
Boy, I don't know, Laura. That's really a good question. I really don't know, other than I guess experience is one thing. Just seeing when you see the terrible things people are doing to each other in a family, and then you realize how much of that is automatic behavior, and that when the intensity decreases, they function differently in relationship to one another, and how important these people are to one another, despite all the stuff they're doing with each other. But I think it's, yeah, I just don't know if I could answer that question. I didn't come from a differentiated family, that's for sure. And I was in a favorable position within my family, which I think helped me be a little bit more of an observer. And I think a lot of it I got from my mother. Yeah, I really don't know how I could respond to that, other than I guess just seeing it in people. I just see it. I don't know if
it's a very simple observation. It's a very simple but powerful thing, maybe similar to what you spoke of earlier, Bob, about the simple idea of sitting there with them and not getting it in your head that you need to fix it. And when we can say it over and over again, but to really live it is unique. And my brother-in-law is a psychology professor. He asked me to give a talk to his interns in their counseling center about Bowen theory. And one of the interns presented a case. And the thing that really amazed me, is pertinent to what Lori says, is that I think I almost didn't realize how all this life, all these years with Bowen theory has made me just, I'm I'm just orienting towards all the players in the family in the story that you hear when the case gets presented, with this no heroes, no villains mindset. And the trainees were kept kind of pushing me like, well, what about this villain? What about that villain? What about that villain? You could see their mindset, their early training had inclined them towards thinking that way. And yeah, it was just, I think it's a good observation that Lori makes about your book too.
What do you think, Lori? What are your thoughts about the difference?
Well, I really did take it personally, first of all, because
You schooled her. You schooled her, Noone. That's not bad to school Lassiter.
I grew up in the least differentiated out of the children in the family. And I think that does affect how I think about Bowen theory. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book. And I'll just add that after reflecting on it, I'm thinking that having that more, again, the word is not a very good one, positive, but just seeing what's good about families, I think is a characteristic of higher differentiation, which I don't have, but I aspire to. So I like the book. I think it's very solid. I haven't read the whole thing by any means, but I think there's something about, for me, and maybe for others, this view of the family as being a good thing, as opposed to, the other side, which is also very much present. But anyway, I think
the source of all pathogen. I mean, it's a very simple point, but I think that many people who find themselves drawn to Bowen theory and the communities that have grown up around them, the training communities, that's one of the core things that they find unique, is that some of the other clubs in psychology, in clinical psychology, are really continuously trying to look at how the family is the generator of the problem.
Yeah.
This sort of like, and there really is a hidden, I think, message that you're not going to get free unless you sort of judge and distance from these people.
Well, I grew up, I'll just add briefly, I grew up believing that the problem was in me. So I found it very satisfying to gradually, through Bowen theory, to recognize how much the problem was in the multi-generational family. I was, my parents were trying to hide that side of things.
You probably would have liked that session with Whitaker.
I was delighted to discover. Anyway, thank you very much, Eric and Bob.
Yeah, thank you.
I just spontaneously decided not to do a breakout. I think it's more just feels right to just talk to Bob. And Bob, Jackie Schwartz from California has a question here in the chat. I'll read to you. And we have about 5 minutes left. So if someone else wants to ask Bob a question or make a comment, you can do that after this. She wrote, Bob, in your book, you wrote that you see differentiation of self as a phenotypic phenomenon, as its variation among individuals and families is principally based in the multi-generational family emotional process. Can you elaborate on your thinking about differentiating self as a phenotype?
Yeah, I mean, would have to do with the phenotype being the expression, the actual phenomena. So their genes are involved, but by and large, it goes back to that comment you made that was in the book about the what had been seen as a vulnerability gene really became as a sensitivity gene. And it's really the experience of interacting in the world that determines how that gene gets expressed or what that gene contributes to one's functioning. And I think that the family itself, it's so clear. I think that's one of the great things about this theory. Anyone can test it out in terms of the multi-generational family. All you have to do is get enough information on 4, sometimes 5 generations, and you can see the process at play. It's pretty clear to me. And so that this is shaped by what's happening in the environment and the family, primarily the family in that environment and responding to it. So the phenotype would be that expression. I mean, the actual organism itself, whether it's the family or the individual, that is shaped by the experience. The neuroscience is just so clear right now about how the relationship system influences development. They haven't gotten to a systems way of thinking about it yet, at least in terms of the family. But this brain of ours, in terms of its structure and functioning, is being shaped in utero and throughout our lives. So that's what I meant by the phenotypic side of it. If you can tweak that a little bit, then you add something to the future generations.
Speaking of future generations, I want to do a shout out to the journal that Bob is the editor of. And I think you and the team are doing a very nice job of keeping that journal lively and relevant. And I subscribe to it, and I want to encourage everybody on the call and everybody who will listen to this later to consider subscribing to this journal, the Family Systems, which is published by the Bowen Center. It's a very important.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's just being shipped today, this current issue, which is a special issue on climate. And it's an expanded issue. And it's I think it's really a very rich issue. So I would encourage people to subscribe to it, just going to the bowencenter.org website to subscribe to it. It's a remarkable issue. And the next issue, you'll be able to see an article by Dr. Lori Lassiter. So that it's another bonus in subscribing.
It's easier to subscribe to now, and you can get the editions over the computer in a PDF format, which is helpful. And I don't always read every article, but I always look over the table of contents and see, okay, there's one I want to read. And I'm always glad I did. Is there one particular article, Bob, in the current edition that, I'm not saying to pick the best one, but just one that comes to mind that it might be helpful for people to have a tip about that is there?
No, I'll give you a tip on all of them. I mean, it's Victoria Harrison has an article on the impact of the environment on anxiety and how it is involved in our responding to climate change. Dan Papro has an article in there. Stephanie Ferrara has an article. There is an article by the visiting presenter. He's a evolutionary economist, Dr. John Gowdy in Texas, who has an article. So it's really a rich issue. And so I would shout out all of them for that issue. I don't think I could pick one.
So again, looking at the impact of the environment on the individual and how that affects the whole situation with climate change and how humans respond to it.
Yeah.
Well, we're at the end of
what Bowen theory can offer to beginning to think about this greatest change or issue that we're faced with as a species in the future and in the present.
Well, it's a real honor that you were chosen. A lot of work gone into your career to be chosen to be the editor. So congratulations on that, Bob, and thank you. I don't imagine you're getting paid a lot to do that work. So support the journal, and we're at the end of our time, Bob. Just thank you so much for all the mentoring that you do and the colleagueship and the work you've done, and for joining me today here and having this chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
You too.